Welcome to the Willing Wisdom webinar, presented by John Tabet and the Viewstone Investment team of IA Private Wealth. This webinar is being recorded for future playback. You are visible to the webinar host and the panel, but not to other guests, and all guests have been placed on mute. There will be a time for question and answers at the end of the presentation. To ask a question, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen and type in your question. You may be invited to participate in a poll during the presentation. These are optional, but I do hope that they will provide some insight into some of the issues presented. The Viewstone Investments team mission is to help the ordinary and the affluent, preserve and grow wealth, simplify financial complexity, orchestrate financial care, decumulate wisely, and transfer wealth prudently. This webinar serves to address 4 of the 5 goals. We will not be speaking about any investment themes or growing wealth. This is about simplifying a complex topic, orchestrating financial care, decumulation, and the prudent transfer of wealth. These conversations seem to be on the minds of our clients, and they may be on yours. We trust you will find this insightful, helpful, and hopeful for the future. Without further ado, please let me pass this over to John.
Thanks, Laura. Well, I do welcome all of you and thank you for attending. And this has been something that has been a goal, a dream of mine for about 2 years now, and have been looking at opportunities to have a conversation with Tom Deans and his book, Willing Wisdom. It is a book that I read a number of years ago and have subsequently read it probably 4 or 5 times and given away 200 or more copies of the book. I believe in the message so much. And it seems like the topic of wills and estates is something that often we don't want to talk about, and yet is at the forefront of our thinking at times. And whenever I bring the topic up, clients are all over it and want to engage in that conversation. So Tom, thank you for your time this afternoon. Thank you for writing the book, and clearly it has struck a chord. Congratulations on being on the New York Times bestseller list, and welcome.
Well, John, great to be here, and thank you for that kind introduction. It's been an incredible journey writing the book and then sharing this message in 26 countries. Yeah, it's been an amazing journey.
Well, why don't we just get right into it? A number of participants have received a copy of the book, but why don't you give us an overview of why? Why did you write this book? And tell us a little bit about the background and how you came to this.
You know, in a moment of candor, I would say that anyone who writes a decent book is actually trying to convince themselves of an idea, not their readers. And I think what strikes people when they read Willing Wisdom is that they can see that. They can see that I'm trying to work through all of the complexities that I think most adults have to confront when we confront our estate plan. We're confronting our mortality. We're confronting about what's that last piece of our retirement look like when we are really in the care of others, right? We're looking to family primarily to oversee the care that we're receiving. And these are complex, emotional, difficult questions to resolve on our own mind, and difficult to watch our parents go through that. So I really, for some reason, I have had this real intergenerational fascination. And I think primarily because I got to know my great-grandparents and watch them pass away, and watch my grandparents provide care for them, and then watch my parents in their 70s provide extraordinary care for my grandparents. And so now at 59, I see my parents at 86 and 83, and it's like, I feel like I've already been in this movie as kind of a participant. And I just think it's such a fascinating subject that most Canadians, quite frankly, most people anywhere, struggle with to really make sense of it and do a good job of it. And I'm not just talking about the wealth, but the family relationships and the wealth combined.
Yeah, I think it's a topic that it touches all of us, regardless of our economic status. We all go through life and death and And regardless of how much we have, we can still transfer an enormous amount of wisdom and history. And that is the part of your book that I actually really took to heart and loved the most. For our listeners, perhaps you could just talk a little bit about the current environment and overview of estate planning today in Canada, and are estate plans in good shape?
Well, the quick answer is not really.
Yeah.
I wish I had better news, but there is a little bit of a silver lining with this pandemic. It has really brought estate planning from priority 127 in people's lives to really one of the top three things that people want to move forward with, because we've all been thrust into this through this pandemic, thrust into personal situations, or we're watching a friend or a family member or someone in our community that we know having to deal with the issues, right? As I said, I'm 59. I had two parents, 86, 83. I mean, they could have ended up on a ventilator. Thankfully, because, and we're going to be talking about family meetings, I mean, I have those critical documents that will allow me to serve my parents should that scenario unfold. But a lot of Canadians were finding out the hard way that, when parents or loved ones, or even children, adult children, were ending up in hospital because of this pandemic or for some other reason, they were bumping into privacy laws and they weren't getting access to the information, their healthcare information of a loved one. So it is a great place to make the point that estate planning isn't just about dividing your assets when we're gone. Estate planning is very much about the living, right? It's about financial power of attorneys and healthcare directives, which affect us while we're still on the planet. And I think that little subtle reminder is a great place to remind people that there's a really great reason to move forward with our estate plans. If we do have wills, great time to update them and revisit them, not just by ourselves, but with our family as part of a much larger conversation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It seems as if we've reduced estates or estate planning to this notion of a transaction that happens after our death, in which assets magically move from one generation to another or one person to another. And the more I deal with clients, the more I look at this for myself, I realize that estate planning is really the conversation. It's a conversation that I have now with my adult children, and it's a conversation that they have amongst themselves as they watch my brother and I and our spouses look after our aging parents.
Yeah,
and
it's interesting. 12.5 million Canadians don't have a will. The other roughly 13 million adults that do, 80% of those documents are badly outdated. In other words, executors that have been named 20 years ago have already predeceased them, which was the case with Bobby Kennedy, right? 1968, when he took a bullet in Los Angeles, pretty horrific event. He had a will. Bad news is, his brother was still executor. He was assassinated 5 years earlier. I don't know who is advising the Kennedys, but they're not advising them now, right?
Well, and Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General, wasn't he?
He was indeed, not just a lawyer. I mean, 4 U.S. presidents died without a will, right? 2 were lawyers.
It's shocking.
Half of all lawyers in Canada don't have a will. I mean, it's interesting because it is a subject that eludes some of the most accomplished business minds, academics, legal minds. There's something exceedingly odd about this subject that is rife with fear and superstition and procrastination that prevents really smart, accomplished people from moving forward with the basics.
Yeah. Well, it seems like this would be a really good time to introduce the fact that we have some polls that we're going to be doing throughout this webinar. And our first poll is on the timing of a last will. And so let me send out this poll. What was the timing of your last will? And let's see where we go here. Oh, we're getting some good participation. That's fantastic. All right. I'll give it another 2 seconds here. right, we have almost 92% participate. Fantastic. So here we have it. 13% of those on this webinar don't have a will. 8% I've been meaning to do it. And this is the part, the 16% and the 18% in terms of last updated 5-10 years ago, 10 to 20 years ago. And I was meeting with a client not too long ago, 5 children. And when I asked them when they had last updated their will, they realized, oh, I don't think we've updated it in a while. And they only had one of their children listed in their will. It was their oldest child for obvious reasons. And the will was 34 years old. So.
Yeah. Now, yeah, that's very, very common, John. Very, very common indeed. It is really very common for lawyers, for example, and I'm not picking on lawyers, but often you'll hear lawyers say, it's important to review your will every 5 years. Listen, I changed my will 3 times one year. I sold a business. I had a death of one of my beneficiaries and a birth of a new beneficiary. All 3 very distinct spread out events that led me to change my will 3 times in 1 year.
Well, it's interesting. As I said to one of my clients, one of the things that we do as financial advisors is we annoy our clients like there's no tomorrow, because every time there is a financial change in their life, we want updated paperwork. What better time to think, oh, I should update my will as well, because this obviously has made a change. I've gone from being self-employed to employed, or employed to self-employed. I've retired. I have new children. All of that. So, yeah.
Well, that is excellent, John. And I can tell you that puts you in the minority of advisors, because half of advisors don't have wills. Never mind make it their life's mission or part of their practice management to encourage their clients to get this done. They haven't done their own work.
Yeah, it's that's the shoemaker and their kids not having shoes. So yeah. So what do you think is preventing people from putting these estate documents, these estate plans together?
I think there's a couple of reasons. One is superstition. There's a lot of people who believe that here's a copy, here's a will. If you talk about a will with your family, if you go to a lawyer and have it drafted, if you sign the will, hold the will, bring it home, you're asking for trouble, John. There's a lot of people who really fear that if you talk about aging and dying and who is going to get you're kind of going to accelerate your demise. And of course, can you imagine me arguing that if you signed a will, that it will extend your life, that studies show that that's equally absurd. Right. Superstition, do not discount how afraid people are of this subject. 2 is procrastination. In other words, they'll often say, well, next year we're going to sell our business and that's going to change our life financially. So we'll wait till that event. They'll always find another major life event because they'll say, well, we're just going to have to change the will. Listen, there's something called a codicil. It's a super fast, inexpensive way for amending a will. My comment would be, listen, get a will done. Do not let perfection be the enemy of the good. In other words, do your best effort. Estate planning, as you alluded to at the very beginning, it's not an event. It is something that we must stay on top of every year. And I talk about in that book, I talk about how my birthday is my will day, right? It is such a reflective day, particularly as we get older, right? A birthday is kind of mathematically measuring our march towards the end. It is a reflective day. And I review that 1 or 2 pages that really deal with my beneficiaries. And I just give it a little bit of a gut check. And most of the time it's fine. Other times, boy, it's a real wake up. It's amazing what happens in 1 year.
Yeah, for me, my birthday is December 31st. So you can imagine the emotional turmoil I go through every December 31st when everybody is celebrating the end of a year and not me. And I'm still bitter about it. But at the same time, I'm always reflecting, what has the year done? What have I achieved? What did I fail to achieve? And then I look ahead and I think, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go? What do I want for my wife? What do I want for my kids? What do I want for, my church? What do I want for my community? And so I think those things through, and it seems like we have this natural opportunity to have that gut check, as you called it, but we often kind of push it down and we don't want to think about it. So
yeah, no, I like that. I like the way you phrase that. I really like the way that you approach estate planning from a kind of a relational point of view, because your wealth in the fullness of time will impact your beneficiaries. It will release potential in the next generation, create all sorts of opportunities for education, starting businesses, healthcare, all sorts of really interesting, fun, fantastic, positive things that your wealth, hard work, ingenuity, creativity is going to impact. And so your approach to estate planning is really answering the fundamental question: who will be my emissary? Who will continue my work? That is another proxy language for who is my legacy and what will it be? It's your family.
right. Yeah, it's actually one of the things where now I have started to think beyond my lifetime. Who are the subsequent generations? What are the conversations I need to have with my own children? What are the conversations that I may have with their children? And maybe I will never meet my great grandchildren or my great great grandchildren, but what will they know about my parents? Because it's my parents that actually got my mind thinking along this path. And then I happened across your book. And so that was key and pivotal for me.
Oh, thank you.
So now, you've talked about COVID-19 and your message and your book has some opportunity and relationship with what we are facing or what we have faced in this pandemic. So can you elaborate what you're talking about in terms of, the pandemic, COVID-19, late in life care?
Yeah. So, as I suggested, there's 12.5 million Canadians without a will. Something is going on at the very moment in time when fewer and fewer people are writing wills. And that is data. We're actually leaving larger estates. So today in Canada, $205 million will be inherited. That's 205 million today, tomorrow, and every day for the next 10 years. It's roughly $755 billion will change, intergenerationally change hands. It's a tsunami of money. And yet we're writing fewer and fewer wills. So I am fascinated by that dynamic. What is going on? And I spent a lot of time trying to really crack this nut. And what I've been able to discern, in fact, is there's something called family systems theory. We have the leading edge of the baby boomers. They started to turn 65 in 2011. So they're just turning 75 now. They are the most affluent, hardworking, parsimonious, ingenious, incredible generation, right? They heard about the Second World War, the First World War. They had grandparents that experienced the Great Depression. They were shaped and influenced by that storytelling, and they worked hard and they were waiting for the next crisis. The reality is they have created such extraordinary wealth, and yet they are approaching estate planning the way their parents approached estate plans, which their parents didn't have wealth. It was rare. So there was no family meetings. There was no real discussion about estate planning because there was nothing to divide, right? Their parents died with a little bit of a wealth, or maybe they had a company pension, but it wasn't a priority. This generation, if they approach estate planning the way their parents did, we are in for a big, big problem. Mm-hmm. They have surplus capital. They have extraordinary real estate holdings. They have businesses. They have incredible portfolios. And if they die intestate, or if they die with outdated wills, or if they die with estate plans that have been kept secret, silence is the great destroyer of Canadian family wealth. It's not families that have, relied on advisors like yourself who know that silence is a problem. It's bringing that structure and transparency and good governance to these families and the urgency to do this work. so that the next generation is prepared for what is coming their way. Not going down that road like we see in the movies where everyone is gathered in a lawyer's office for the reading of a will, and they get to that section of who gets what, and then there's a gasp because someone got more, they got the family cottage or the business, and someone was excluded. Like, that is a horrific way for families to continue someone's life work. And we only need to read the front page of the Globe and Mail or some of the US newspapers to see how almost every month there's another prominent family being featured who is battling in open court over the division of family assets because there was no family meeting, no conversation. And I'll tell you, I make the point in the book that if you think divorce is expensive, that's like a dress rehearsal for the really big show, which of course is estate litigation, where it is scorched earth and families are grinding 10, 15, $50 million estates to zero with legal fees.
Well, it seems as if we have this remarkable way of avoiding the topic of money. We don't want to talk about the topic of money with our parents. We don't want to talk about the topic of money with our children, in a way, because we have this sense that, well, we don't know enough. And if I ask questions, I may show my ignorance, I may show how naive I am, or I may come across as a little bit arrogant. And I look at it and I say, at some point, we may be called upon, if I'm in my mid 50s, if I might be called upon, and I have been called upon, to look after my parents, not just my parents from a health perspective, but my parents from a financial perspective. And if my brother and I didn't have a conversation with my parents 8 years ago, oh my goodness, the last 6 years would have been a disaster.
Yep.
And yet I think the last 6 years, since we have collaborated together to look after my parents in their aging and their diminishment, and now, in a way, I am the one who looks after the money, and my brother is the one who looks after, from a healthcare directive. We share all these things. We talk about it. We talk about it all the time. But if we didn't have that conversation with my parents 8 years ago, it would have been a disaster. We wouldn't have, one of my favorite experiences was actually my father, when he realized the pace at which he was diminishing, shared with my brother and I, at some point, I will be more of a burden to your mother than she can bear. And at that point, you need to do what's best in her interests. And when we came to that day, my brother and I went to my parents, but we spoke to my dad and he said, remember that day you told us? We're taking your word for it today, and we're doing this actions. And tears came to his eyes because he realized we were actually following his directives and his wishes.
Well, it's such an extraordinary story you've shared. It's quite a gift, actually, to whoever is on this call, clients or people who are thinking of working with you. I can tell you, because really what that demonstrated was profound wisdom. It takes extraordinary wisdom to relinquish control before someone asks you to relinquish control. That's the ultimate expression of control, is actually voluntarily giving it up. And that's what these family meetings are doing. Prior to the pandemic, I was working in Chicago. I often give this presentation inside family meetings. It's about an hour just to get families talking. And that day in that room, there were 17 family members, 3 generations. They had been meeting for years. Guess who was chairing that meeting that day? It was a 15-year-old girl, 3rd generation. They rotate the chair. That family meeting is not about the grandparents. That family meeting is about the grandparents, but it is not about them. It is about them telling stories, sharing how the wealth was created, not just sharing all that great, phenomenal good news and how smart they were and clever, but actually where they pulled up short in their lives and in their careers, really imparting this profound wisdom. And it was these kids know exactly what is coming their way, G2 and G3. And I'll tell you, they are going to do great things with that wealth. They will be emboldened by that wealth because they have such a profound respect for how hard someone else worked to create opportunities for that family. That does not come easy. That is work. That's the work that Rockefellers did. That's the work that the Vanderbilts didn't. And if you want to read and compare and contrast the biographies of two, dynastic American families, those are great biographies to read from that perspective.
Yeah, I will say again from personal experience, with my mom and dad celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary, they wanted to take the family on a cruise, and I convinced them that they needed to share their life story with their grandchildren. And what I realized is, boy, I knew so little. And as they shared their life story with me, I put it into PowerPoint. And shared that PowerPoint as they spoke and asked them questions. And I looked at my children and my nephews and nieces and how much more they already loved their grandparents, but how much more they admired them. And how my parents have looked at their grandchildren with such affirmation and being encouraged that generation is doing well, independently, but as part of a collective whole. So
yeah, I think I talk about in Willing Wisdom, I talk about the ultimate objective for someone to have what's called a G3 meeting. 3 generations in a room is an exceedingly high functioning family, particularly when they share the same advisor. I don't know if I've made the point to you before, but certainly my advisor is my parents' advisor, was my grandparents' advisory firm, and now advising our kids who are 28 and 26. Do you know, well, I know you know, but the work that an advisor can do when they have 100-year view of wealth and the multiple generations, where it came and how it's transitioning and what it ultimately will accomplish. I know advisors can do their best work, right? As opposed to that staccato approach, right? One generation, make it, then it goes to some other advice. What a lost opportunity for that continuity of advice and that continuity of care and transition.
Well, again, I think we have reduced, and don't get me going down this path, or else I'll never stop talking. But I think we've reduced the notion of financial advice to an investment portfolio, and that's just such a small sliver of the whole. And what's the purpose of money, and how is it enabling and encouraging? How do you not want it to ruin the next generation? And often when I'm asked with a new client to come in and solve a problem, it's because something's gone wrong in the family system, and somebody's received some money, and all of a sudden they're spending it and blowing it very quickly outside of what they would have done if they didn't have the money.
Right, and that's often the reason why we have so many people without wills or people without dated wills, because they knew intuitively that there are challenges in families. And look, there is virtually no family that doesn't have some kind of wrinkle, some kind of interesting dynamic, whether it's marital breakdowns, addictions. Look, life is complicated. Families are not perfect, but that imperfection doesn't go away by ignoring estate planning. And the smart families lean on their advisors for technical solutions to deal with whatever is going on in the family. It is absolutely possible, and I know you know this, for a family to leave, if they have 2 kids, one child, maybe their daughter has a Harvard MBA and their son has a cocaine addiction. It is absolutely possible to leave those 2 children the exact same amount of money. You know that one can go into trust because sometimes people get healthy.
Yep.
But what we know is that cutting someone out of a will, setting that next generation up to litigate, keeping this all secret, only being disclosed when we're not here to watch it unfold when someone lawyers up because they're aggrieved, we can do better. And that is, of course, the great outcome of a family meeting. It is about whatever we decide, explaining our rationale, explaining our wisdom, right? Willing wisdom. It's not about writing wise wills. It's actually about transitioning something that's more valuable than money. It's our family story and our aspirations for our children and grandchildren in the future.
You know, and can you talk a little bit more about what goes on in a family meeting? You know, I have my own notions, and my kids, some of my kids are actually on this webinar, but talk to me about a family meeting and what does it look like and what is it not?
Well, first of all, it is not what most people think or fear it's going to be, which is a brouhaha, a free-for-all, a meltdown, just the worst possible. Like, think about it, you're bringing family together to talk about money. How crazy is that? Exactly. The reality is, unlike a classic do-it-yourself project like going to Home Depot and buying lumber and building a fence on the weekend, this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about having a skilled professional in the room, someone like yourself who have done this many times. You know, and I know that when we have that independent third party in the room who is bringing an agenda, right, that has been agreed to, sharing that agenda, someone taking minutes, bringing some structure and predictability and governance, and good facilitation to a family meeting. Look, they start a little stiff, but they'll go in such fascinating directions. And then you get the classic, why didn't I do this 10 years ago? This is, seriously, this is actually fun. We have answered the question, how much money do we need to fund our late in life care? Now we're going to take that number and pad it a little bit. So now we've answered the question, we have surplus capital. So now how are we going to transition that capital? Are we going to wait till we're dead? Or are we going to do something far more fascinating and start to maybe open up investment accounts for our grandchildren and encourage our grandkids to work with our own advisors, one-on-one? Like, we're going to, not with all the money, but just a little bit of the money to teach them, you know, those profound lessons that we learned 50 years ago, like spending less than you make, the power of compounding interest, the power of a diversified portfolio investment, all those fascinating, simple things that we forget to teach our kids. And then as they demonstrate a healthy relationship with their transition wealth, and remember, gifted money, living gifts are tax-free.
Yeah.
If it goes well,
then the older generation can see them at work.
Totally, exactly. What we do is we let that fear really grip us and design our estate plans, and we hold off and we hoard our wealth to the very end. And then we miss out on the best part, which is watching people go off and do really fascinating and interesting things, like really profoundly shaping people's lives. And we're here to enjoy it. And then guess what? Here's the big, big contrarian idea in Willing Wisdom. Here it is. I believe that when we approach our family and use our surplus capital to deepen our relationships and build trust and mutual respect, I actually believe it shows up in the quantity and quality of late in life care that we hope to receive from who? From our pharmacist? From our hairdresser? Who is going to be hiring or paying for our late in life care, like scheduling it? I watched my parents in their 70s providing care for my grandmother who lived to 99. In her, right? We spent $1.5 million of after-tax money providing really high quality in-home care for my grandmother. My parents were driving her around to appointments. It was exhausting work, but they were glad to do it because so much of the opportunities that they were given were shaped by my grandparents. Right. I watched that. I had a front row seat to watch that. I watched that wisdom. I wrote about that wisdom, and it's available for everyone to replicate.
But it's interesting. You know, my children joke that when we have a family meeting, they will not attend unless I have a PowerPoint and an Excel spreadsheet. And you know, it's a challenge. But I love the fact that now that's the expectation, that they want some information. And we've used this on a number of different occasions. And how much more our kids get out of these conversations. And, you know, some of it goes well over their heads, but they're young and they're learning. But at some point, they're going to be the ones who are looking after my wife and I. I joke, when our kids are little, we're managers. As they turn into teenagers and young adults, we move into management consulting. As they go into college, university, and careers, all of a sudden we become advisors. Hopefully, we become trusted advisors. At some point, the pendulum swings. All of a sudden, they are our advisors.
Yes.
They are our management consultants, and eventually they are our managers, because just like your parents did, they're the ones who are driving. They're the ones who are making the appointments. They're the ones who are talking to the doctors, and they're the ones who are making sure that final wishes are taken care of.
And just to put some context to those remarks, John, 1 in 3 Canadians over the age of 65 are presenting some symptoms of cognitive impairment. I mean, we are living vastly longer than any generation prior, and consequently, dementia and cognitive impairment is a serious issue. I mean, remember, estate planning isn't just about dying. It's actually about financial power of attorneys of being invoked, and the people who we trusted are actually paying our bills and making decisions in our best interest. Now, the insidiousness of that dementia issue is that if we leave that too late and that ship sets sail, we can't execute these documents. They're actually legally invalid. So trying to time estate planning like an oil change is a really bad idea. And I don't know if you've got any estate lawyers on the call today, but if you do, there is not one who has not been called to a hospital in an emergency situation to do a bedside will, trying to itemize the assets, trying to figure out who gets what, when, and how they're going to be divided. It is not the place to do estate planning.
Right. Which is a great time to do another poll and see how, kind of family dynamics would affect, kind of late in life care, estate planning, legacy, what's going to affect your wishes. And, I until I encountered it with my parents, I really didn't get a full understanding of the value of the conversations with them about their belief and wishes on late in life care. So.
Well, John, it's interesting also is that, we go in for the will to a lawyer's office, and I really hope people are going to lawyers, that they're not going to, I always pick on Staples, but that is the one place where people are buying a lot of will kits for $19.95. And why they do that, I don't know. This is not the place to really take shortcuts. You want to get proper legal advice in the drafting of your will. But when you go in for the will, you come out with those 2 bonus documents, right? You're coming out with that financial power of attorney and the healthcare directive. It's that 3rd document that is going to help your family avoid that awful, awful game that is being played in hospitals in Oakville and Hamilton and Toronto and Vancouver and Phoenix. And right now in London, England, there is a family that is trying to siblings debating whether or not they should resuscitate or not resuscitate their parents' life. And it's not going well. That's because they're missing that document that gives guidance in specific language that they can refer to. It's the gifts that we leave our family in estate plans, some of the most valuable gifts are non-financial.
Absolutely. And, I think those are the things that I would want our listeners to take away from this, that what we're talking about, the financial aspects are actually the smallest component of all of this. It's the decisions now, it's the decisions tomorrow in our lifetimes or in our parents' lifetimes or another generation's lifetime. It's those decisions now that are key to these relationships.
Well, absolutely, because we don't know if we're going to be on a ventilator next week, because we don't know the certainty of the trajectory of our life. Some of these conversations will be irretrievable. We just don't know. And if you're a business owner, especially, my goodness, everything I've said, just turn up the volume, because the need to leave a family, to die intestate, Holy smokes, with an operating business, thrusting siblings into business as equal voting shareholders, and watch that dynamic, leaving tax liability, lack of liquidity to pay capital gains that are triggered, like all of everything I've talked about, the urgency for business owners is just that much more acute.
Yeah, I see that with business owners, and I see that with people who have these, I'll call it the family legacy cottage, right? And it's always an aspect that I'm always really careful about bringing up and thinking, where are your kids? And will your kids, they love the cottage now, but it's because somebody else is paying for it. And they love the cottage now because they're in the area, but what happens where they move away and they, they can't enjoy that cottage?
Yeah, and so really, John, in the absence of a family meeting and an honest, open, transparent, and consistent, repetitive conversation about the division of hard to divide assets like businesses and cottages, what you often get is silence. And it is the silence that creates, listen very carefully, it is the silence that creates economic incentives for people to feign interest in those assets like the cottage, because to do otherwise is to suggest that maybe someone else will get something and you will be excluded, right? So everyone feigns an interest in the cottage, everyone feigns an interest in the business, where much of the family wealth is being stored in the equity of the retained earnings. So we're creating, by the silence creates those economic incentives for really poorly designed estate plans. Compare and contrast that to the family who has a vacation home. It's maybe a cottage that was bought in the 80s or 70s for maybe, I don't know, $50,000. It's worth $5 million now. I mean, where is that liquidity going to come for to pay the capital gains? But more importantly, I don't want to turn this into a tax seminar, but more importantly, it's a 2-bedroom cottage or a 3-bedroom cottage. And mom and dad have 3 kids and they have 3 kids. Tell me how you're going to stuff 12 people, 12 beneficiaries who are equal owners of that cottage into a 3-bedroom cottage. It's not going to work.
Right. Well, yeah. As we're chatting, I'm going to launch another poll here because I'm always interested in, I was talking to a friend of mine who was named as an executor and actually said, when it came time to execute the will, said, I'm not doing it because the family cottage is a hot button issue and I don't want to be the crux of the matter. I don't want to be in the crosshairs of my siblings. And so he said no. So
well, that would be an unfortunate scenario. That would fall into that category of kicking the can down the road. The problem doesn't go away.
Right.
In fact, unlike wine, estate planning seldom gets better with time. In fact, it usually gets more complicated. The numbers get bigger. The complexity of these estates get bigger, and the more people, right? Then more grandchildren, more complexity, not less.
Right.
So the best time to plant a tree is 25 years ago. The second best day is today. Same thing with estate planning. If you haven't started, tomorrow is a perfect time to start.
Right.
And it is not about perfection. There is no such thing as a perfect estate plan. There's just good, better, and best. And I just think when we get started, we can always improve it. We can start the family meetings. We can start to open the conversations up and reach out for input, especially on big issues like the selection of executors. There are people on this call who have been selected as an executor and they have no idea that has been the case.
Right. Yeah. 27% don't know if they've been named as an executor by a parent, sibling, or friend. 30%. I actually think this is a wonderfully large percentage have seen the will and have had an opportunity to discuss. I love that.
I'm often asked when I'm, particularly when I was doing live events, and we'll get back to it shortly, I'd be signing books afterwards, and people would say, this would be someone in their 30s, 40s, 50s, or even 60s with parents in their 60s, 70s, or 80s. But adults would come up to me and say, look, I have one of those parents from that generation that just will not talk about this stuff. And in our family, talking about money is rude. Like, you just don't do it. It's disrespectful, it's rude. And how do you start these conversations? And I have a simple suggestion, and I've always shared it, and that is just go and get your own will up to date and then share it with your parents. It's weird when adults share their documents with their elderly parents and parent their parents on matters of estate planning. But many, many parents will then go, they'll reciprocate. There's some degree of reciprocity. Well, they'll go, that's weird. We really should share these documents. It's just getting the inertia, just getting it started. Because look, we don't know when we die. We don't necessarily die in order. Today in Canada, 50 people will die. Roughly 50 people will die under the age of 50. We just don't know. But it is a great technique for starting. It's also a great way to start family meetings by, on the agenda, just putting, the sharing of estate planning documents. So people coming to that meeting with a first draft or an executed will. Listen, when our kids turn 18, John, we buy them wills.
Wow.
They're very disappointed. They're hoping for cars. We buy them wills, but we don't go to the lawyer with them. They're adults. The law doesn't say, well, you're a young adult, so no, you're an adult. You're an adult. So they go, and I have a copy of my parents. They have a copy of all my documents. I have our kids. We share these documents. We work on them together. You asked earlier, and I didn't fully answer, what do these family meetings look like? No two family meetings are the same. The early ones are full of governance. But quickly after the documents are drafted and shared, families will move on to the far more interesting and quite frankly, fun parts of family meeting. And that really is philanthropy. That's really where the families are starting to allocate capital, and as a family starting to make family decisions around how they want to support various initiatives or their community.
Well, it's interesting that you would say that, because I actually got a conversation with my parents going after my wife and I had updated our will. And I said, you're retired, we have had these conversations loosely, but where is your will? And they showed it to me. And we looked at it, and in their charitable giving, they had listed a whole bunch of organizations. 5 of them didn't exist anymore. And so, kind of updating their wills and rewriting their wills to better incorporate philanthropy and charitable giving, and more specific legacy thoughts. And that was, they had no idea that those organizations didn't exist anymore.
Well, it's such a great and interesting story. I mean, we often think of that all charities are created the same. The reality is there are 85,000 registered charities in Canada, and they're not all the same. I mean, there's a couple of charities that are in the news right now, and they're definitely in trouble. There is some real issues. In our family meetings, we are bringing charities into our family meeting, and I can tell you, we are putting them through the meat grinder. We are teaching the next generation that the decision to support a particular cause is given the same kind of intellectual rigor as we would any decision, whether it is a dollar that we're applying to an investment, money that we're taking out to consume. What we're teaching the next generation is that a dollar spent on philanthropy, consumption, investment, whatever, it is given thought. It is not capricious. It is rigorous. And I just think that is one of the great teachings and valuable lessons that we can share, profound wisdoms that we can share as part of our family culture that we embed in our family meetings.
We have one question actually, and should spouses be included in a family meeting?
So here's my advice. It's a very popular question. I would say that the very first family meetings should be small, just to get your confidence. So mom and dad and children. But as quickly as you can expand, like the second meeting, as quickly as you can expand to include the partners of your children, please make that an aspirational goal, because look, their exclusion from these meetings are also setting the tone or the culture, shaping the culture in the family. And they're going to get some version of what took place anyways, and running parallel to estate laws in this country and in every country is some version of the Family Law Act. giving spouses entitlement. If there are real concerns around the spending habits or addictions or a marital breakdown, look, hiding that, pretending they don't exist, does not make the problem go away. If you are going to want to use a trust to protect family money in terms of generational transition from marital breakdowns or addictions, or if those are real concerns, then disclose the use of those trusts. Don't make them the secret and the defining characteristic of your estate plan. Make it clear. Make it clear. This is how families can actually manage through these challenges.
Right.
It's not the secrecy. Silence and the secrecy is what is destroying families.
Right. Got one question here, and I've seen this question before, and actually I didn't know how to answer it, so hopefully you can give me some insights. How awkward can it be for an older person who continues to live on when the children know what they will be receiving? And can this lead to impatience on the children's part?
That is a very, very authentic question. Very interesting question. And it is one of the questions that I get some pushback on, because, part of what I'm talking about in these family meetings is stripping away the secrecy. It is that transparency, which of course begs that question, which is, what if I disclose what is coming to the next generation? I mean, what if that knowledge impairs someone's drive and ambition and creates that spendthrift, lazy next gen?
An expectation.
An expectation. Well, I can tell you in our family, we disclose in the context and on the assumption that we die tomorrow, so that our beneficiaries are prepared. But we always leave open in our family mission statement that we craft and share. And early on in our family meetings, at the beginning of every family meeting, we're reviewing our family mission statement, which includes the ideas that our estate plans are subject to change at any time as life unfolds. That disclosure is also disclosure about our personal net worth and who gets what, when, and how, is also being disclosed in the context of the cost of our late in life care. You remember I talked about my grandmother, $1.5 million in late in life care? Well, 10 years prior to that, we were sure we knew what the estate was worth, and we knew what the long-term care was going to cost. There are a lot of people, when they hear that big number, we're going to leave $3 million to you, grandson. But if we live to 99, that 3 million could be materially less. Right. Because the alternative is, if we don't set aside money to fund our long-term care, we could be living in your basement.
Right.
So it is always, the disclosure of our assets is always done in the larger context of the cost of late in life care.
Because we don't want to become a burden to our children.
Right, right. And consider now that for someone living in their 40s, according to some reports, the first person who is going to live to 125 is already alive and well on this planet right now. If we think that we're going to have real financial challenges, right, funding our late in life care now, it is only going to become much more complex and an acute problem if we don't get at this and bring some transparency to this in our families.
Well, think of the impatience of somebody like Prince Charles waiting for Queen Elizabeth to leave the throne, and certainly, again, it's the conversations that go on throughout a lifetime that I think would alleviate the issue of impatience.
Yes.
So.
Yes, exactly. I just think that if anyone has watched those documentaries on lottery winners, sudden wealth syndrome, a significant estate that is sprung on someone at the reading of a will, no family meetings, no prior conversations, no preparation of heirs, it is debilitating. And people often laugh at this. They say, well, I'd love those kind of problems. Well, trust me, these are big problems. Sudden wealth, even high functioning people, high IQ people, they are shocked at themselves on how messed up they can be when they're put in that position of trying to deal with sudden affluence. Equally challenging is someone who is looking at their parents or grandparents and thinking or making assumptions about what is coming their way, and they're not doing their own savings and investing because they've just already got it in their mind that what something is worth. And then, of course, the reading of the will, they find out that they're let down and it's materially less. That is tragic because they've run out of time. Right. They've run out of time to build their own financial plans.
Yeah. Can you talk about, I'm mindful of the time here, but what about singles without children?
So yeah, people without children, I think are, I will give anyone who reads Willing Wisdom who finds that whenever I reference family, I also immediately say friends. There's a lot of people in that scenario where their children didn't have children or their children predeceased them. Actually more common than you think, where friends have been designated as executors or beneficiaries and actually stepping up and providing, extraordinary late in life care. Some big challenges, I should also just point out, there's some big challenges of people late in life amending their wills. Their children have let them down when it comes to their caregiving. And so friends have stepped up to provide that care. And then what they're doing is they're amending their wills to acknowledge that stepping up by the friendship. Right. What they often don't realize is they're really opening that state up for some serious litigation. Late in life wills are often challenged on the basis that someone had undue influence, the caregiver had undue influence over that revision, or someone lacked capacity to make that change with a clear mind. Those two scenarios capture about 95% of the litigation across this country right now, and the courts are full of litigation. Right. Again, surprises.
Well, I am looking at our time, Tom, and an hour has gone by very quickly. Frankly, I could keep this conversation going for another hour. And I want to acknowledge a comment that was made in the Q&A from one of our clients, David. We've consolidated my parents' and our children's accounts with John and IA Private Wealth over 15 years ago. It made a big difference in our family as the changes unfolded in each of their respective lives. John's personal touch and philosophy of family connections are exemplary. Top drawer team, we are big fans. So thank you, David, appreciate that. And it's these kinds of conversations, the conversations I had with David and his wife and their children over years, that this doesn't happen in a week, a month, or even a year. This takes time. And we need to get at it. And so I'm always a big fan of a call to action. So one of the things I want to make sure we talk about is the Willing Wisdom Index. Give a brief overview of that index.
Yeah, John, I just took the ideas in my book and I wanted to create a tool, a digital tool. It takes about 8 to 10 minutes. It's an estate planning checklist. Seriously, it's the best 8 or 10 minutes someone will invest in this subject. It will deal with the themes that we've talked about. And after 8 to 10 minutes, they'll click a button and get a personalized 20-page estate planning report showing the gaps in their estate plan, showing areas, offering recommendations. There it is, offering recommendations to improve your estate plan. You can take that report to your family meeting, use it to guide some of the conversations, and then go to your lawyer. And lawyers take instructions. They're not planners like you. Lawyers take instructions, so when they can tell when someone's got a Willing Wisdom Index report in their hand, because they come through the door and they say, "Okay, lawyer, take notes. Here's what I want. Here's my executor. Here's my backup executor. Here's how you spell their name. Power of attorney, backup power of attorney. Here's how you spell their name." Those meetings with the lawyers aren't 4 hours. They're like an hour. How do lawyers charge?
By the hour.
This is a great tool for reducing legal costs and ending up with actually better estate plans.
My apologies to any lawyers on the call.
Actually, you know what? Lawyers love it. Every lawyer has a story about someone coming in And they say to the lawyer, yeah, I need to do my will. So what do you think I should do? And the lawyer's like, what? Okay, how many kids do you have? How many kids? Do you have a business? I mean, who are the shareholders? Do you have a shareholder agreement? Like, seriously, they don't want to do that work.
And lawyers are supposed to take instruction, not give the structure. They're supposed to take the instruction on the structure.
Right. They draft wills. They don't write wills.
Right. Well, listen, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've loved it so much and appreciate it. Thank you for your time, and just one for the book. So if you would like to receive a copy of the book, Willing Wisdom, please email Lara at larahuska@iaprivatewealth.ca, or give us a call at the office. We will need your mailing address and phone number. We will happily mail this thing to you. And if you want to request a copy of the Willing Wisdom Index, email me at john.tabet@iaprivatewealth.ca. What I will do is I will send you a unique link. That unique link allows you to complete the Willing Wisdom Index. And you can note, you don't have to, but you can note my email address in there and my name. And then once you hit send, when this index, this personalized report is created, I will get a copy as well. And what better document to have in your file here for our next meeting to give us some structure and agenda than that Willing Wisdom Index. And we will include that in our review. And for those who are not part of this team and are looking for an objective, no obligation review of your financial structure, your portfolio in light of a long-term financial plan or estate strategy, please give us a call. Lara will take that and make sure that she assigns it to a member of our team. We are a growing team, and we look to serve and assist all. And so thank you so much for your time. Thank you all. And at this point, we will stop our recording and end our webinar. And I hope you have a great evening and a great day.
Thanks, John.
Bye all. Thanks, Tom.